Yo, how do dogs learn? And really, this applies to all animals, including humans, including your kids, your spouse, your friends, including you. Classical conditioning and operant conditioning.
What the fuck are those?
Find out next.
Using my 27 years of professional dog training experience, I'm helping you better educate yourself so you can make better choices when training and raising your pet dog. This is Dog French Kisses. Welcome to Dog French Kisses. In this video, we're talking about how dogs learn. And dogs learn through conditioning. And what is being conditioned? Associations. When one thing is paired with another, an association might be created and built up. The two major types of conditioning are classical conditioning and operant conditioning. Classical conditioning is the simple, sort of pure version, and operant conditioning is the one that we use to train behaviors. But classical conditioning is always happening during operant conditioning. The associations that a dog makes are what enable it to work. One way to remember it is classical conditioning is the involuntary one, it just happens, and operant conditioning is the voluntary one. They make a choice and they get a consequence. So we'll start off with classical conditioning. It's also called respondent conditioning or Pavlovian conditioning. This is when a biologically relevant stimulus is paired with something else, creating an association for the dog. A biologically relevant stimulus is something that's inherently or naturally meaningful for the dog. Good examples of this are your dog gets scared in a certain place or situation, and then in the future gets scared even though the scary thing isn't there anymore. Or your dog sees a squirrel in a tree and checks out that tree every fucking time you walk by it again. Sometimes these associations can be made really fast and they can be really strong. And one of the best examples is food, and that's exactly how this was discovered. So a lot of people are familiar with the story of Pavlov's dogs, the Russian scientist who rang a bell for his dogs to eat and they started drooling at the sound of the bell. Well, that's actually not the story. What really went down is some pretty wild shit. If you're curious about it, go look up the details. So Pavlov was originally studying digestion, and as famous as his story is, he actually won the Nobel Prize for his studies in physiology, not behavior. But this is where the crossover happened. So he had a bunch of dogs in his lab doing experiments on their digestive systems. Like I said, it was some fucked up shit, so be warned in case you go look into it. So Pavlov noticed that when his lab assistants would come into the room, the dogs would start salivating. He was curious about that and eventually figured out something that would change the world. So his assistants would feed the dogs, and we all know dogs naturally feel a certain way about food, of course. But then the dogs started to associate the food to the people. So after feeding them enough times, the reaction the dogs had around food would happen with the lab assistants, even when they weren't feeding them. Then he started experimenting with pairing sounds with food, and that's what led to the discovery of classical conditioning. Apparently, he never actually used a bell. Instead, he used metronomes and other things that make sounds. And what's really interesting about Pavlov's observations is that they led him to believe that animals were not just super simple mechanical beings. Keep in mind, this was the late 1800s, early 1900s, and our views on animals were a lot different back then. What he noticed was different dogs had unique personalities and would respond to things differently. And so the takeaway in training is to always remember that each dog needs a unique approach and every situation is going to have its own nuances. So to recap in simple terms, classical conditioning is pairing a naturally important thing with something else, creating an association between those things. And it's important to understand that this can happen at any time. We all have unconditioned or natural innate responses to things. And then there are conditioned responses, where our natural responses are paired with and then become associated with something new. Think about all the things that happen in your life every day, your expectations about them, and how those associations affect your thoughts and behaviors. Those associations were created either through classical conditioning or through operant conditioning, which brings us to our next part. An operant is a behavior. So operant conditioning is conditioning behaviors. This is what's going to be going on with the vast majority of animal training. It's pretty silly for someone to claim to be an animal trainer of any kind without knowing the details of operant conditioning. And as pet owners, it's really helpful to have an understanding of this stuff. You don't have to be an expert dog trainer, but you can learn how these things work and make your life a lot easier. Now, everyone's familiar with the terms positive and negative reinforcement, but most people don't really know what those mean. And there are actually 4 quadrants of operant conditioning. So there's reinforcement and punishment, and both have a positive and a negative. And it's very important to understand 2 things. 1, none of this is inherently good or bad. And 2, the dog decides what is reinforcing or punishing, not us. And they're not really deciding anything, but what I mean is that every animal experiences things differently, and the outcome is ultimately what matters, not our intention. The more you get into it, the more it'll make sense. So, reinforcement is increasing behavior. Punishment is decreasing behavior. Positive is addition, negative is subtraction. So positive reinforcement is adding something to the situation to increase a behavior. Negative reinforcement is removing something from the situation to increase a behavior. Positive punishment is adding something to the situation to decrease a behavior, and negative punishment is removing something from the situation to decrease a behavior. Now, if you're like me, the first time you hear this stuff, it's like, what the fuck are you talking about? Don't stress on it. My next video is on behavior modification, and the first part is going in depth on the 4 quadrants of operant conditioning. So watch that video and watch it a bunch if you need, or look it up online and just go over it until you get it. So these are the basics of all animal training, dogs included, of course. Classical and operant conditioning. When we're trying to get well-behaved dogs, these conditioning ideas are the foundation, and they should be part of your training plan. That'll do it for this video. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Watch my other videos and stay up.